Okay, welcome everyone to Building and Scaling SBOM Programs. As you just heard, I am the course author for Sec 547, Defending Product Supply Chains, where we cover this topic and a bunch of other topics around supply chain vendor risk, software assurance, software bill of materials, and other similar topics. The reality is I've been doing work in this space for longer than we actually even use the terminology for software bill of materials. SBOM is a term that we have had in the industry in the past. Matter of fact, years ago, SBOM meant a sales bill of materials. It's only been in recent years that SBOM has really become prevalent as a term to describe our software inventories, and we're going to get into all that. I'm also the author for Software Transparency, which is the industry's first book on software supply chain, where we got into a lot of these topics. And I'm going to use a lot of the experience that I've had over the years working for startups, working inside organizations, building programs as a consultant, as a vendor, and as an insider to bring all these lessons to bear as we go through and kind of explore what it takes to do all this. So this presentation is really broken up into 4 primary phases. First, we're going to get into the SBOM life cycle and talk about what is that life cycle? What does it mean? What are all the phases? And what does it mean when we say that there's a maturity aspect to this life cycle? We're going to get into all of that. We're going to get into some of the really important flows that are part of that life cycle, supplier-centric flows, consumer-centric flows, and third parties that support our programs as well. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that make all of this difficult for us, but don't worry, there's a lot that we can do about this. And then we're going to wrap things up with kind of what comes next. How do we get started doing this work, and where do we go from here? All right, so let's get right into it. Okay. So what is an SBOM? Now, there's a bunch of words up on the screen. I'm not going to read them off. This is a definition that was proposed by NTIA, which was a government agency that was responsible for driving a lot of the early evangelism around a software bill of materials. But just to simplify things, it's an ingredients list. It's an inventory. It's a list of all the things that are in your software. It's designed for computers to consume. It's machine readable. It has a standard schema, a standard format that is predictable, that a computer can ingest and understand and parse and do something with that information. It has information about the relationships of these components. How are they related together? Well, dependencies, how are they related to each other? And a bunch of other metadata. And actually, the concept of a software bill of materials has evolved dramatically over time to talk about pieces of metadata that we had never even thought of when we first started talking about software inventories, things like cryptographic information and AI model cards and things like this. This is all starting to become part of this whole SBOM conversation. So this is just a sample software bill of materials that was created by an open source project called CDXGen for the Flask application, the Flask framework, which is a Python web framework. Basic software bill of materials. This is a Cyclone DX 1.5. We're not going to get real deeply into talking about all the different standards here, but Cyclone DX is one of the 2 primary software bill of materials standards. We get some basic document metadata, just describing the document itself. We're not even getting into the contents of anything. Just what is it that we're looking at? We're looking at a software bill of materials, Cyclone DX, it's version 1.5. SBOM document itself can have versions. You may decide that you need to make a change to an SBOM that you previously issued. So you need to release a new version, maybe a version 1.1. We have a section of metadata that talks about the tools that were used to generate the SBOM. You may find that there are differences in results based off of how the SBOM itself was generated. In this instance, the CDXGen tool was used to create this software bill of materials. That's an open source an open source project that can be used to create an SBOM. We have what the SBOM describes. When we see, at least in a Cyclone DX SBOM, when we see component with no S on the end, component, that's actually the primary component. What's referred to as the primary component, which is another way to think of what are we describing? Are we describing a product? Are we describing a piece of software, a framework, a library? It doesn't matter. Component is the primary thing that all the other components that we talk about, all the other software inventory is then describing that primary component. And this is just a general SBOM. Don't worry if this looks like gobbledygook to you. We're not going to dive really super deep into this particular concept. We do get into this in the course and whatnot, but we're here to talk about program. But I just wanted to give you kind of you've never seen what an SBOM looks like. This is what an SBOM looks like. Okay. All right. So what do we use them for? Now, the primary use case that we're going to talk about today is vulnerability identification and vulnerability management, because that's really the number one thing that gets people really excited about the concept of SBOM. We think about things like the Log4j vulnerability and many others that we've seen over the years. And we come back and we say, if we'd only had SBOMs, our incident response would have been so much easier. We wouldn't have had to run around in circles trying to figure out where that vulnerable component was installed. We would know it's in this software right here, and that software over there, and this other software over here. In many instances, very widely used, especially in the open source world. Common software development uses open source components. In many instances, 80 to 90% or more of the software that you're buying is open source. But those components that are in those products that you're buying are also in a bunch of other products, right? Other open source products and other commercial products as well. And so the SBOM gives us a way to say, hey, this is a vulnerable library. It's used in 200 other products. Which 200 products and which version of those products is this vulnerable version of this library found in? That's really kind of the promise of SBOM that gets a lot of people very excited, because it introduces efficiencies into our security operations process that would be hard to achieve if we didn't have that level of visibility. But that's not the only thing that SBOMs are good for, right? For a long time, SBOMs have been used to describe licensing information. We can look at compliance use cases. We can look at indicators of compromise. We can even capture like hashes and cryptographic information about our software in the SBOM, other indicators. We can use an SBOM to understand, where did my software come from? What is the origination point? How did it change along the way? What's known as pedigree, right? Like, not only where did it come from, but maybe there was a backported fix, meaning someone upstream from you grabbed that component, made a change. Maybe they fixed a vulnerable component, but didn't change the version number and then re-released it downstream to you. Unbeknownst to you, same version number, it might be vulnerable, it might not. Pedigree allows us to capture some of this information, right? We also look at procurement use cases, and we can use SBOMs here to describe and gain assurances that our software suppliers are doing the right things, that they are actually paying attention to this, right? We may use it as just a quality gate to say, hey, I have assurances about the software assurance rigor inside my supplier's program, because they knew what an SBOM was and they gave it to me, right? I may want to use it for more security operational purposes, where I want to get frequent updates and say, hey, every time there's a new release, give me that software bill of materials. I want to ingest it into my process and understand, is there something new that I should be worried about, right? Lots of things that SBOMs are good for here. All right, so this image right here, you're going to see this image several times through the course of this presentation. This is the core of our SBOM lifecycle. Now, process flows like this can be a bit of an eye chart. I'm not going to go through the entirety of the lifecycle right now at this moment because we're going to get a chance to break this up into different streams. But I want to just kind of at a high level break this down for you. Across the top, we have our sets of activities, generation of SBOMs, verification of our data, correction of the data, enriching the data when we want to add additional elements to it, sharing that information, consuming that information, and actioning that information. At our core, these are all the buckets of activities that we're doing across the life cycle of our software bill of materials. And then down the side, we have our actors, our groups. These are the people that are doing things. Now you'll notice the first couple of swim lanes, development and product P-Cert, they're the same color because generally they're inside the same organization, right? You may have situations where there's an external entity that's responsible for patching, or you may have some sort of integrator situation where this winds up being another third party. But for the sake of our conversation, we're going to make the assumption that the same entity that develops the software is the same entity that is responsible for communicating downstream with customers and consumers of that software, and ultimately sharing that software bill of materials and other risk management data about the software. Then at the very bottom, we have consumers. These are the people that are using software. Now, as a software supplier, you're also a consumer, so you may have multiple roles. You may be in the development swim lane for the software that you sell and deliver to market, and in the consumer swim lane for the products that you buy and acquire that then runs your business, right? But the consumer then is ingesting this information and doing something with it. That's the whole point of this. I'm going to ingest this information and produce some kind of value from it. The third part is when we talk about third parties, we're not talking about third-party risk management. We're not talking about vendors. What we're really talking about here is solution providers, okay? This is the ecosystem of tool vendors and consultants that support this whole SBOM ecosystem. There's a ton of great companies out there that sell amazing products that will help you do all of these things, from generation to manage your SBOMs, to consume and analyze and do things about things, as well as consultants that get inside the process and support both suppliers and consumers. So the third party kind of sits in the middle, but I just want this to be clear. The third party flow is a somewhat optional flow, depending on how you're executing your program, either on the supplier side or the consumer side. But we're going to cover third parties as well. Okay. All right, so let's get into what do we mean by generation, right? Like in our generation phase, right? This is really what we're talking about. We're talking about I'm creating an SBOM. Now, I might be creating an SBOM just I'm using manual tools at the command line or digging into source code. Like without tools, that's pretty much what you're stuck with, right? I'm doing a source code review. I'm seeing what's in it. I'm manually identifying things. That's terrible. No one wants to do that. We have a bunch of really great tools out there that allow us to do this. We have our source composition analysis tools. We have build tools. We can generate SBOMs from a GitHub action. We have a bunch of great vendors out there that have come to the realization that, hey, we need SBOMs even when suppliers don't provide them, or maybe even when suppliers can't get them themselves because they're ingesting a compiled binary into their process. And so we need to have reverse engineering capabilities to be able to produce these software bill of materials as well. So all that stuff, that's part of generating the SBOM. I put request in this same bucket because it's the entry point for your process, especially if you are a consumer. If I don't have an SBOM and I want an SBOM, I'm going to come to you, supplier, and say, hey, I'm interested in knowing what's in this software that either A, you sold me, or B, you're trying to sell me. How are you going to get me this information? I need some transparency into what it is that I'm buying. right? And that can happen through a bunch of different ways. Again, third parties can facilitate this process. We may have some sort of portal that we can go to and that we can request it. I may be reaching directly out to someone and asking the question, but the end state of that requesting and generation of the SBOM ultimately facilitates the management of this data, right? It doesn't do me any good to go ask for a bunch of JSON and XML files, which is typically how you'll see a software bill of materials is a JSON or an XML document, right? We have all these files cluttering your SharePoint server or your file server, and they're not being used, and they're really not of much value. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to a point of value. And that's when we get into the management phase activities, which I'll touch on in a moment. Okay. All right, so SBOM management. Now, there's a linkage between requesting and sharing, right? I'm going to request the thing. Hopefully you share it with me. You may have a lot of different mechanisms whereby you share this information with me. Sometimes we're just sending emails back and forth. That's not terribly scalable, and it's kind of hard to track our progress when all we're doing is sending emails, but that's how it happens sometimes. Sometimes we just set up an FTP server and throw some documents up there and let you have at it. We've got projects like digital bill of materials that have expanded and provide mechanisms and frameworks to exchange this information. We have other kinds of commercial exchanges and repositories of this information. People are sharing their SBOMs via API. Sometimes, for instance, a dependency track, which is a notable open source software bill of materials management platform from OWASP. If you want the SBOM for dependency track, which is an SBOM tool, if you go to the API, you can retrieve it from the API itself. It's right there. You can just go into the application itself, and there it is. There's your software bill of materials. It hosts on GitHub, it hosts in other places. And there's a new project called Project Koala, also known as the API, or the Transparency API, which is a Cyclone DX project, which is trying to standardize the mechanism of distribution of this information, not only SBOMs, but software assurance, software attestations, and a lot of this other information, so that we have a common framework, a common way to exchange this data. So a lot of really good work is going out there. But it's all kind of part of this, when we talk about management, that sharing of data is kind of the entry point to this, because I can't do anything unless I can receive the data. How do I receive it, right? Once I got it, I've got to do something with it, right? How am I going to consume this information? Maybe I have a fantastic platform that I just throw all my SBOMs into, and it analyzes it, and it gives me a bunch of pretty reports and information that I can do something with. Maybe I'm inspecting things manually. Maybe I'm opening up the JSON file and going line by line and looking at things. Again, not ideal, but maybe that's what you're left with. But there's a bunch of other really great command line open source CLI tools. For instance, we've got the OSV scanner from the fine folks at Google, which is a really great tool where you can ingest an SBOM and identify not only vulnerabilities, but other malicious capabilities and malware that's sourced from the Google's OSV database, which is another vulnerability database that that focuses on open source vulnerability information, right? Consumption and analysis are almost chained at the hip. Now, the reality is analysis is trying to produce some sort of outcome. We're trying to understand something. It may not be vulnerabilities, okay? We're predominantly talking about vulnerabilities here, but I can't really analyze something unless I can consume it and parse it and then correlate that against other data points that I'm doing my analysis on. I have a CPE string or a Perl string or some kind of software identifier in my SBOM that I can go look up in a vulnerability database and say, aha, this software is potentially vulnerable based off of what this SBOM is telling me. and how this marries up to the vulnerability database data, this software might be vulnerable, and it might not. There's all kinds of reasons why it might. But it may not be vulnerability data. We could be, we talked about a bunch of other use cases, right? The crypto, AI, licensing. Maybe I'm mining licensing data. Maybe I am ingesting open source projects into my development organization, and I'm worried about copyleft style licenses. And essentially, these are the kinds of licenses that require me to share back any works that I produce that are the product of a copyleft licensed software that I brought in my product. Meaning, if I have ingested an open source library that is one of these kind of license types into my project, once I produce something that is derivative of that, I'm then required to share it back with the community. Not everyone's okay with that. Not everyone is that open source friendly. We have a lot of people that are using open source, but that doesn't mean that they're open source friendly, right? We're using the open source stuff, but we're using it for commercial purposes, and we may not be sharing that back with the world. Those licenses and understanding license and compliance is extremely important when we're talking about this. And ultimately, we want to do something about this information. We produced a bunch of risk information as it relates to this. We identified vulnerabilities, have identified license and compliance problems. Then I want to fix the problem, right? Either maybe there's a patch that I can apply, maybe there's not. If it's an upstream component, I probably can't apply a patch to it without breaking my software. I've got to wait for my software supplier to release a patch. And the general rule of thumb that I've heard from people from other software vendors in the space is depending on how deep nested that software component is in that tree, right? A dependency of a dependency of a dependency of a dependency. We're 4 levels deep now. For each level down, it's like another 2 weeks minimum to get a patch out the door, because I've got to wait for the people that are up ahead of me in the chain. And they got to wait for the people that are up ahead of them in the chain. And there's this kind of like cascading domino effect. And that's in a perfect world if everyone is paying attention and everyone's doing all the right things. The reality is, especially when we're talking about open source, many of these people are not incentivized, they're volunteers. There's no guarantees, there's no, there's no warranty on an open source software, right? You may be 2 weeks, and maybe 2 months, and maybe 2 years. It's really hard to say, right? So you may find yourself in a situation where you cannot remediate, patch, eliminate the problem, and you may have to implement what's known as a virtual patch or some sort of mitigating control. Maybe it's a firewall rule, an IPS rule, a configuration change. You may have to, block access to the internet or whatever. Maybe some other things you've got to do to deal with the vulnerability, right? And we have some coordination activities. We're going to get into some of those coordination activities here in a little bit and what we mean by that. And then we have the typical risk management things. Are we going to just accept the risk? Yeah, there's nothing we can do. We're just going to accept it. Or maybe we're going to create an exception for a period of time, like a timed exception. Maybe we're only willing to create an exception for a reasonable period of time until our supplier can fix the problem, or maybe transfer the risk. Maybe we rely on insurance or some other mechanism. But when looking at all this from consumption and analysis and driving action, again, we're trying to drive action. If our actions are driven off of wrong data, we'll engage in the wrong actions, right? We may be telling people to fix things that don't need to be fixed. We may be not telling people to fix things that they should be fixing. We have a garbage in, garbage out problem. Consider GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Data quality is an incredibly central piece in building your SBOM pipeline. And it's not unique. We see a lot of this stuff across our space, even just typical vulnerability management. Forget SBOM. If I'm running a vulnerability management program and my asset inventory is wrong, I have a garbage data problem that's going to create problems in my vulnerability management pipeline too, right? But SBOM is no different. And as we'll talk about, there's a few things that make this garbage data problem worse within the SBOM space. And then we have enrichment, right? So we've created all the things, we've analyzed, consumed and analyzed all the things. Great, what now? Enrichment is an opportunity for maturity. It's an opportunity for us to get better, right? If we go back and walking kind of through this in the life cycle infographic, but you'll find enrichment kind of happens in the middle. Doesn't happen on the front end, it's not on the back end, it's not a thing that you do after you have actioned all your stuff. It's a thing you do when you're trying to improve your process, right? We're trying to deal with some of those data challenges that we were just talking about a minute ago, right? Let's look and see how good are these SBOMs. Let's use like diffing capabilities to compare our tools, right? I have two different tools that are creating SBOMs for the same products. They look different. Why do they look different? Is one better than the other? Is one more right? One of them got an extra component over here and the other one got an extra component over there. Which one is correct? Are they both correct? Do I need to aggregate both of them? Like, what do I need to do to make my data better? Right. And so we need to go through this kind of verification process and understand this. We do some basic quality checking. And we may need to do some manual sanity checks. I'm not saying you should be going through manually line by line because that's nuts. But when the data doesn't make sense to you, don't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and take a look at it and say, why is this happening, right? And once we understand that there's a problem, we got to fix it, right? There's all kinds of opportunities to correct the problems. And there's all kinds of problems that can occur. We can have missing information, wrong information, duplicate information. I've seen tools that will merge multiple SBOMs together because this SBOM got half of the product and this other SBOM got half of the product. There was a little bit of overlap in components. They merge the two SBOMs together so they get a nice, pretty unified SBOM. And lo and behold, they actually duplicated some of the components sitting in the middle of that SBOM, which created some confusion. Or other times I've seen situations where, hey, I thought that I duplicated a component because I saw it multiple times, but the reality is that library actually exists multiple times in this software project. It's used for multiple capabilities inside the software. And sometimes I may even have 3 different versions of that same library that are used in the same software project. And so you really need to ensure that you understand what this data is telling you and find some ways to address some of these data challenges. We need to address problems with, it could be a schema non-conformance issue where we're using the wrong kind of data block inside of a document, or we don't have good canonical references, a software naming problem, we have bad software names, or maybe we just don't have useful information. Maybe it's just not complete enough for us to be able to use, and we need to fix those problems. And then once we've fixed all those problems, it's kind of core, fixing the core problems, then we have some opportunities to really enrich that software bill of materials. And this is one of the things that I think the third party, many of the third parties are very, very good at, especially when we get into threat intelligence and vulnerability intelligence and pulling in other kinds of information like exploit mitigation capabilities in a firmware file. You're probably not going to find that in your software bill of materials. But if you're using that, if you're generating a product security risk report based off of the SBOM and can marry that up with other information like exploit mitigation controls and exposed passwords and things like that that are relevant for instance, like a firmware file, those are some really great opportunities to enrich our data, right? All right. So when we talk about maturity, what we're really getting down to is this whole concept of crawl, walk, run. And we use a 3-stage maturity model. This is not the CMMI for SBOM, although it's similar. But within the SBOM community for a long time, we've been using these terms crawl, walk, run. Now, for the longest time, crawl to most people meant generation and generation only. I do not think that's correct. That is my personal opinion based off my experience in doing this work, because I don't think generating SBOMs without the ability to do anything with them does anybody any good at all, other than drive the evangelization of the concept of SBOM. And okay, that may have some value, but ultimately we're trying to accomplish some kind of risk reduction here. And you're not going to get any risk reduction unless you're actually actioning the information that comes out of the SBOM. So from my standpoint, generation management are both core to crawl. You don't have a program until you have the ability to produce or consume a software bill of materials and analyze it and do something with it. Now, maybe your actions are low confidence. Maybe the analysis is bad. That's fine. We just got to get started. I'm not saying it's got to be perfect. Absolutely not. We've just got to get started. But we, at a minimum, we need to be creating the software bill of materials and analyzing it and parsing it and understanding it and doing something with it. Otherwise it's waste, right? Then we get into our walk phase. We start to get into enrichment. These are our opportunities to make things better. This is when we get into like SBOM quality and SBOM quality scores. There's a few vendors out there that are really focused on SBOM quality that can help you make much better SBOMs. When we get into other like third-party intelligence enrichment, a lot of this information, and that's when we get in kind of a little bit more of a walk mode. And then lastly, and I'm gonna be real frank, I don't see too many people that have moved past walk into run. Most of us are still crawling or walking. Very, very, very few organizations are running in their SBOM process. And this is when we get, once we got a really high confidence data, once we have a really good grasp on everything, then we start automating. We don't want to automate before we have a good grasp of things. I see a lot of people rush to automate, and all they're doing is automating failure. That's not what we want to do. We want to make sure we have a really good grasp on things before we automate. And then we can pull in other really amazing things like supply chain and attestation, things like in Toto and Salsa and some of these other frameworks that tell us a lot of information about how our software was produced, that when combined with an SBOM, and they are complementary. I kid you not, Salsa and SBOM do not do the same things. They're both related to supply chain, but they work better together, right? And so once we get our SBOM house in order, we start pulling in some of these attestations, then we have a really powerful solution. So I put together this graphic just a few days ago because I was kind of trying to think through, like, what is the typical journey that people follow? For the last few years, people have been really laser focused on SBOM, either because of the Executive Order 1428 or the Cyber Resilience Act or the FDA guidelines or PCI 4.0 or whatever. And we're not here to talk about regulations and any of that stuff. That's not what we're here to talk about today. But these things get people paying attention. They get people to think, hey, this matters. This is important. I should be doing something about this, right? And so we started with this whole thought of like, SBOMs are amazing. This makes sense. We want transparency. We want to know what's on. We want to know what's on the cereal box that we're getting ready to pour in our kid's bowl on Saturday morning for his breakfast cereal, right? We want to know what's in the ingredients. This is something that we understand. We want to know what's in the food that we consume. We want to know what's in the software that we consume as well, right? So we started doing this. And people started collecting a bunch of SBOMs. And then they realized they were just kind of filling up a file storage space. And they really weren't sure what to do with them. They didn't have good tools in place. And the tool space has matured a lot over the last few years. Anybody that tells you that it doesn't make sense to do SBOMs because the tool maturity is not in place enough to action an SBOM program, they're wrong. That may have been true a few years ago. That is not true today. There's a bunch of really great solutions out there. But when we start getting into this and we start making some actions based off of this, and we realize that we're creating chaos. we're creating churn, we're creating political strife inside of our organization because our data is bad, right? And so then we start fixing our data problems, right? And then we go through when we automate and expand, and before we know it, we think, how do we ever live without this? Now, again, the organizations that I have worked with, most of them are still down into this data is kind of bad and we're fixing our data problem space, right? Because there's some endemic challenges in our industry that make all of this really, really hard. And the reality is there are not good open solutions to fixing some of these data problems. So a lot of organizations have been left to kind of building their own proprietary solution or cutting corners where it makes sense to do so, right? And we're going to talk about some of those data problems and more specifically in a moment. But really what we're talking about is software naming and vulnerability database data problems that create challenges inside this life cycle. All right, before moving into this next section, I think I saw a few hand raises. If I could get some of those questions that may have come in over the last few minutes.
Tony, we're actually clear on questions, so you're free to move forward.
Okay, awesome. Just comments then? Okay. All right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the flows. We're going to start with our supplier flow here, right? Now, every organization is different. You're going to see things in this flow that's just like, well, that's not how we operate, and that's fine. Everyone operates slightly differently. You may not have a PSERT or product security incident response team organization, or they may not be involved in your SBOM process, right? I have seen many organizations structure this way where they start with the development process and they say, you know, obviously we're developing software, not just SBOMs. We're not in the business of creating SBOMs. We're in the business of creating software and selling it, right? But as part of that process, they're generating that SBOM. Now, you may recall that I said that the walk phase is where verify, correct, and enrich lives. So let's start with the left from the supplier standpoint. I'm going to create an SBOM. Maybe I create it as part of my build process. Maybe it's something that I do after the build and I generate an SBOM. Maybe I use some kind of tool or something, and then that feeds into something that happens as part of release management. However I do that, it doesn't matter, right? I'm creating an SBOM, right? I may be bypassing those next three stages until I get to a more mature program. But before I share it with anyone, I'm going to share it internally with someone. Again, it may not be the PSERT. It may be my boss. It may be someone in the AppSec organization. It may be somebody else, right? But I'm going to share this SBOM and I'm going to say, ideally, number one, is there anything that we need to fix? That's the first question I should be asking myself. Before I ask myself, is this suitable to share with a customer? Which I think that's where a lot of people's heads are at. I think the first question needs to be, do I have a problem in my software? Do we have something that we need to fix, right? This should be an important part of your vulnerability remediation process, right? And that's what we should be doing, right? We should be looking at that. We should be internally sharing it, consuming, analyzing, and asking questions. Do I need to fix anything? No, we're good. Okay. Now I need to understand where I have commitments for sharing. So that's probably my number one. That's probably my number one right now. Do I have contractual commitments for sharing my software bill of materials? Right. That's probably where people are starting, right? Who have we committed to? Maybe it's the federal government as part of a federal procurement effort, or maybe it's somebody in electric power that's leveraging like the EEI model procurement language and is requiring SBOMs as part of contracting. Maybe it's someone that's just forward thinking and they built it into the contracts, right? But eventually we want to get to a point where this is just part of our process. We just share this information because it's good business, right? We share this information because we have a high degree of confidence in what we're building, and we want to tell everybody how awesome we are, right? Here's our SBOM. It's clean. Isn't it beautiful? Everyone should see it. I'm going to staple it up on the wall, right? But this should become part of your release management cycle. And these should get issued with every single release, because every release your software has changed. Every time your software has changed, there's a chance that your SBOM has changed as well, right? So we want to make sure now, if we haven't made a change there, SBOM for the most part is a static document, right? Unlike a vulnerability disclosure report or a vulnerability exploitability or a VEX report, which we don't get into too much in this presentation, but we do talk about within the course in some other places. But those are more dynamic documents because vulnerability statuses change over time based off of threat intelligence and other factors. Your software doesn't change until you change it, right? New release changes your software. That's when you need a new SBOM. Now, from a consumer standpoint, you may not have the appetite to consume every single one, but as a supplier, it's your responsibility. Now, granted, I'm not saying contractual or legal, but it's in my opinion, your ethical and moral responsibility to share with your customers, hey, the software has changed and this is how it's changed, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about software bill of materials types as it relates to vulnerability discovery. So this list comes from the CISA SBOM working groups that got into some conversations around what kinds of SBOMs do we have out there. We have design SBOM. It's not even a real SBOM. It's just like, hey, it's theoretical, right? Like this is how we think we're going to build our software. This is our design. This is what's going into our software design, right? It's not real software yet, right? It's theoretical. They have source-based SBOMs, right? Based off the source code that we produce, based off of our build, based off of some artifact that has been analyzed after the fact, a binary or firmware file. Deployed SBOMs based off of the software that was actually deployed inside the environment, or runtime SBOMs that are based off of what's actually executing, right? They can be very, very accurate, but they may be very fixated on the profile of that system, including things like shared libraries. I may have different shared libraries on system 1 and system 2 running the same software, but that SBOM may look a little different, right? But when we think about these SBOMs, there's this kind of line in the sand between what a supplier has access to and what a consumer can theoretically have access to. If supplier doesn't share these SBOMs, the consumer is limited to analyze, deployed, and runtime SBOMs. The consumer will never get design, source, and build SBOMs ever unless the supplier provides them, okay? This is an important distinction because one of the things when I started looking in the tooling space, I started looking at some of the SEA providers and they were telling me, hey, we do binary analysis. You can give us a binary and we'll tell you what's inside it. I'm like, that's great. Let's look and see how your capabilities actually work. Oh, we need a manifest file. Where do I get that as a consumer? You don't, right? As a software developer, you have that information. Why do I need binary analysis of a thing that I built, right? Like these are the kinds of scenarios that are much more useful downstream, but there was a little bit of confusion when I first started looking at the tooling in this space, and it wasn't imminently clear. So I think it's important to understand where you're going to get these SBOMs from and what kinds of SBOMs you're going to get, right? When we talk about PSERT, or the concept of Product Security Incident Response Team, now this is a graphic that comes directly from FIRST.org. FIRST is responsible for CVSS and EPSS, the Exploit Prediction Scoring System, and a bunch of other really great projects. including the PCERT services framework. It is, I think, probably the best reference on the internet today that describes what a PCERT is. And the graphic here on the screen, to me, kind of tells it all, right? It's about collaboration. The PCERT's about collaboration, internal, external. That's what the PCERT role is. They're gonna talk to their internal development teams. They're gonna talk to their downstream consumers. They're gonna talk to other PCERTs. They're gonna talk to other certs. They're gonna talk to security researchers. And maybe they're not having active conversations. Maybe they're just ingesting threat intelligence feeds. But the point is they are conveying and exchanging information on a continuous basis to give them real-time situational awareness on what's going on with the security posture of your software. They make a lot of sense to engage in your SBOM and your SBOM communication process. If you're not already engaging your PCERT, if you have one, not everyone does. If you have a PCERT and they're not engaged in this process, I highly recommend involving them. If you're on the consumer side, think about who your contacts are at the supplier. Who are your vendor relationship people, right? Who are you engaging with? Is it just the salesperson that sold you the software? Or do you have those security contacts, either PCERT or security operations inside your supplier's organization to give you this information? This is an important part of the puzzle. All right. So now let's look at solution providers. Our solution providers, they live in the middle. As I mentioned, they are an optional but accelerating factor in this entire situation. You can do this without them. It's going to be painful. It's going to be real painful. These folks are the magic that glue everything together and makes all of this stuff actionable so that we're not all sitting around, digging around in spreadsheets all day, right? This is where all these really great tools come into play. This is where a lot of really great consulting organizations come into play. Some of these consultants have their own homegrown tools that they have developed as part of this. The tools that are out there, especially some of the open source tools, some of them are very good, some of them are not so good. And sometimes when those not so good tools fail to deliver value, you need a really smart consultant to bring into the picture and say, hey, you got to help me out. I thought I knew what I was doing here, but this open source project didn't quite deliver the value that I was hoping for. Can you help fill in the gaps for me, right? And they may recommend other tools. They may do some manual work for you, but they'll engage with you and figure this out. They may support the consumer in trying to understand the consumption of this data. They may be supporting the suppliers and helping them produce this information and gain high quality results. But when you look at the generate, verify, correct, and enrich stages, it's very similar. It's very similar to what is done in the development organization, except they're either directly supporting the development organization in doing the work, or they may be doing it on behalf of a consumer, for instance, from a reverse engineering standpoint. If I'm a firmware or binary or reverse engineering platform, I may be generating SBOMs. I don't have source code. I wish I did, but I don't. This is what I have. I can produce a result. That's pretty good. It's not perfect. It's not as good as that source or build SBOM, but it's certainly better than nothing, right? And I can help you understand whether these are good SBOMs, and I can help you work through this process, right? When you get into the consumption and analysis phase, this is something that really kind of occurs whether you're supplier, solution provider, consumer. At some point in our process, we have to understand if what we're looking at makes sense. Does it produce actionable results, right? And so if I'm a third party, this is probably the intake point for my product. If I'm a product company that's selling SBOM management tools, that consumption and analysis capability is probably the first thing you see. That pretty dashboard that says this many vulnerabilities, this many risks, this many issues. That's what I see, okay? Again, they sit between the suppliers and the consumers, and they're engaged in all these activities. They may just function as like a data escrow or a data broker. They may be facilitating conversations. You may have, in some instances, I've worked in some organizations where we just used, and this isn't just SBOM, just a code escrow, right? We would get into high-risk contracting organization, high-risk contracting scenarios, and our customer would say, hey, you're a tiny startup and we don't trust you, so you need to park your source code with a code escrow, because if you go bankrupt, I need to have access to your source code, right? Same situation here. We do this with SBOMs, repositories, threat intel, all kinds of other security value that comes into the picture as part of this as well. Okay. And we get into the consumption phase. Now, the entry point for the consumer is usually not generating. It's usually not generating. You notice suppliers, third parties, they're generating. They're well tasked with doing that. Third parties specialize in it. Developers, they have the tooling inside their infrastructure so they can do it fairly easily. As a consumer, you have very little capabilities natively without some sort of third-party tool to help you to do this. So your best bet is to ask someone that can help you, right? Ask the supplier to share with you. Ask the third party to get the information so that they can share with you. But ultimately, the lion's share of your focus, the lion's share of your program is probably going to be fixated on consumption analysis and ultimately mitigation of risk. Now, risk mitigation happens at the supplier side. They're patching the things. And on your side, it's mitigating the risks that you can't directly control, like code, right? If you can't directly affect the code, then maybe you can directly affect the security controls that sit between you and the vulnerable software. Okay. We have a bunch of different kinds. When I think about consumers and building programs, this is a very, I'm very clear, this is a very generic slide. This has very little to do with SBOM and everything to do with just building programs in general, right? Whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish, whether it's compliance, security, whatever, right? What are the things that I can pull to my process? What is my ability to do something with that? And what can I produce from it? SBOM programs are no different. When I think about like if I'm bringing in garbage SBOMs, what is my ability to process a garbage SBOM? Well, it's probably not very good until I can figure out how to get a better SBOM, right? But specifically to SBOM, there's some really important questions that you need to ask yourself inside the management bucket. How do I get them? How do I get them? Is it spelled out in the contract? Is it just something the supplier does? Who do I ask? How often do I need them? I want the supplier to do it every release, but do I really need them every release? Is that a conversation you want to have with the supplier, or is that just something that you manage internally? And what do we do with them once we get them? They sit on a file server, or do we actually process them and generate some value from them? What happens if we get a bad one? What if it's a too big to fail vendor? What if it's Microsoft? Are you going to get rid of Microsoft inside your organization because they gave you a ugly SBOM? Probably not. But you need to figure out what you're going to do about it, right? And the big thing, and I touched on this a couple of times in this presentation, do you even know where your software is installed? I find a lot of people are building these SBOM programs and they still have terrible asset inventory. If you don't have a good asset inventory, then you should probably drop off this webinar right now and go fix it, because that's much more important than building an SBOM program. Fix your asset inventory. Get a basic software inventory, and then bring in your SBOMs and enrich your asset inventory with SBOM. Okay. Think about our inputs, our SBOM. This is a basic vulnerability management lifecycle. There are others out there. Discover, analyze, and prioritize. Fix, verify, report, optimize, right? Like, what do we, like, as we go through this process, right? where are our inputs into this process? How does the SBOM actually help us? The SBOM may not help us with a fix. The analysis of that SBOM may help us as we go through and we prioritize, right? We can use it to discover a problem. We can use it to verify that we fixed the problem, right? But it's not the entirety of our solution. It's just a tool in the tool belt. Okay. And ultimately, when we identify that we need to fix something, how do we fix it? We have this bifurcation in our process, right? Security operations can go do some things. They can patch if there's a patch. They can implement a mitigating control if they have to, maybe a temporary Band-Aid. Or I may need to go beat up my supplier and say, hey, your software is vulnerable. Are you planning on releasing a patch? Our support agreement says that you have to give us patches within 90 days. Where's my patch? Fine. But you need to have some coordination between security operations and whoever's responsible for that conversation. It may be your security operations people that are talking to these people, or maybe a vendor relationship owner, right? You may be talking to the PCERT, you may be talking to somebody else in the organization. But the key point is we've got to get people talking to each other, and we've got to get people out of their silos in order to fix these problems. All right. Okay. Some of our challenges as we work through this. I'm sure some of you have heard about some of the recent slowness that's coming out of the NVD and the processing of vulnerability data. NVD is not the only vulnerability database out there, but it is certainly the most common one and the one most people turn to for this information. We're starting to see some issues with the data quality and speed and completeness of information that's coming out of that NVD ecosystem, right? And we're relying on this information to answer questions. We correlate this data against our SBOM data to answer questions for us. If either the SBOM data is wrong or the data we're correlating it to is wrong, on either side, we could create a problem. We have software naming problems. Do we use a CPE value to identify the software? Do we use a Perl to identify the software? By and large, there's no Perls in the NVD. There are a few, but very, very few in the NVD, right? And Perl is, without getting too deep in the weeds on Perl, Perl is more appropriate to use for like open source, like package manager managed components and libraries, where CPE is more appropriate for products. And so if vulnerabilities are only known based off of a Perl relationship, but the NVD doesn't know about the Perl, then we can never stitch that component together with the vulnerability. And that becomes a problem unless we can get that data out of the package manager ecosystem to give us this information. And this is where we get other third-party vulnerability databases like the OSV, like some commercial vulnerability databases out there that kind of help us work through this, okay? We have problems with like supplier name. Is it Microsoft Inc? Is it Microsoft comma Inc? Microsoft space Inc? Microsoft underscore Inc? Microsoft no Inc? Oh, Windows 10. Windows 10 is a one word with no spaces, or does it have a space? Does it have an underscore? Right? Does it have a dash? Right? Is it just Windows and 10 is the version? Is Windows 10 a separate version from Windows 7, or is it a separate product? Right? Like, we start to get into these challenges with understanding how we version software and name software. And we have this global problem with software naming in general that creates this issue for us, that if I can't name things properly, again, this is a data problem. If I can't name it properly, then I can't correlate it to an external source that tells me risk information about that thing that I named incorrectly. Okay. We have quality problems. SBOMs, the NTIA, as part of the Executive Order 1428, was tasked with 7 minimum elements that we use to capture things like, supplier name and version and, some of these other fields that were part of those minimum elements. And we can, for instance, dependency information, dependency graphs, dependency relationships is one of those things. That is part of the minimum elements. This is supposed to be like, people talk about an NTIA compliant. No one at NTIA is holding you accountable for not having a compliant SBOM, right? That's not a thing. The compliance is not a thing, right? There's people out there that are telling you that and using those words, but the reality is this is what as an industry, these are our expectations about what makes a good SBOM. And we have an awful lot of SBOMs out there that do not have an understanding of dependency relationships. The list of components, but we don't know what relates to what. So we don't know if this component is vulnerable, which part of the software does it create a problem, right? Does it create a problem in a part of the software that I never call in my code? Or does it create a problem in a part that is critical to my software's operation? I don't know. From the SBOM, I wouldn't know, right? We have all kinds of other quality challenges that we have, how accurate was the detection? Did we get version identifiers? How deep did it go? Is it just top level only? Some of the regulatory requirements that are coming out there are only requiring a top level SBOM. You don't have to go below the surface. Back in my day, we called that a software inventory. I don't even consider that an SBOM. But hey, we have top level SBOMs that are essentially software inventories, right? We have issues with how complete the SBOM is, other data that we may want to bring in to enrich our SBOMs as well. So all this creates challenges for us as we go through this. All right, so where do we go from here, right? The most important thing, and going back to my eye chart of a process flow, you just want to get started. You just got to get started. It doesn't matter where, crawl, walk, run. If you're just getting started, don't wait for things to be perfect. Don't wait for the tools to be perfect. Don't wait for all your suppliers to start feeding you SBOMs. Start asking them now. If you're a supplier, just start with making some SBOMs. If you're a consumer, start asking for them. Or if you're getting them, start by analyzing them and doing something with them, right? We don't have to do all these other things at once. We can get to all that. We just need to get started. But you need to manage your expectations. And you need to focus on the quality and the process as you move through this. Now, this infographic, this is a two-sided PDF that will be sent to all the attendees as a part of attending this webinar. This is the same image that we went through in the presentation. We also have a bunch of other information in here about what do all these steps mean, who does it, when do they do it, as well as some of the key flows that move throughout this process. I want to thank you for joining me in the second in our webcast series on mastering supply chain security. Back in July, we covered enhanced vendor risk assessments. This is obviously building and scaling SBOM programs. In October, we have a session on supply chain security incident response. It's focused on, you just got taken unawares. This is not about building an incident response program. It's about the old crud moment. The bad thing just happened. What do I do now? Right? So again, thank you for joining me. I hope to see you on the October webinar. And here's our contact information if you want to get in touch. I'd love to see you in a future run of SEC 547, or if you just want to reach out, you have a question, feel free to reach out. Thanks so much.
Wonderful.